Have you ever noticed that the biggest prison in the world has no walls, no bars, no locked doors, and yet millions of people spend their entire lives trapped inside it? It is not made of concrete. It is not guarded by soldiers. It is built from one sentence. What if I fail? That single sentence has buried more dreams than failure ever could. Let me tell you something. The greatest tragedy is not that people try and lose. The greatest tragedy is that they never discover who they could have become because they were too afraid to find out. Imagine standing at the edge of two different lives. On one side is the life you already know. Safe, predictable, comfortable enough to survive, but never exciting enough to truly live. On the other side is a life you've imagined 1,000 times, a business you've dreamed about, a skill you've wanted to master, a book you've wanted to write, a conversation you've wanted to have, a city you've wanted to move to, a version of yourself you've secretly admired every time you looked into the mirror. Between those two lives is one bridge, belief. And most people never cross it because the bridge looks too fragile. Here's what most people don't understand. Confidence does not come before the journey. Confidence is built during the journey. People wait until they feel ready. Successful people become ready because they think about this for a moment. Have you ever learned how to swim by standing beside the pool? No. You can read every book about swimming, watch every video, listen to every expert, memorize every technique. But until your feet leave the edge of that pool, you are still someone who only knows about swimming. Life works exactly the same way. You don't become courageous by thinking courageous thoughts. You become courageous by doing courageous things. You don't become confident by waiting. You become confident because you survived something you once thought would destroy you. I learned something years ago. A farmer plants seeds into dark soil. He doesn't panic because he can't see the roots. He trusts the process. Yet people plant effort into their own lives and expect flowers by Friday. When nothing changes after a few days, they quit. The farmer would laugh. He understands something that impatient people never do. Growth is happening long before it becomes visible. Maybe that's where you are today. Maybe you've been working quietly, learning, training, failing, getting back up, wondering if anyone notices, wondering if any of it matters. Let me tell you something. The roots always grow before the fruit. The invisible work always comes before the visible success. The strongest buildings in the world spend months below the ground before anyone admires the skyline. Your life is no different. Now think about the title we've been talking about. Just believe in yourself. No risk, no story. That isn't just a motivational phrase. It's reality. Tell me one memorable story that began with someone choosing the safest possible path every single day. Where is the excitement in certainty? Where is the growth in comfort? Where is the transformation in repetition? Every story you've ever admired started with uncertainty. A person had no guarantee, no applause, no audience, no certainty. Only belief. And belief was enough to take one more step. People often say they want an extraordinary life, but they insist on making ordinary decisions. They say they want change. Then protect every habit that keeps them exactly where they are. They want new results while defending old routines. That cannot happen. Life doesn't negotiate with wishes. Life responds to actions. Here's what most people don't understand. Fear is incredibly persuasive. Fear sounds intelligent. Fear sounds responsible. Fear sounds practical. Fear says, maybe next year. Wait until everything is perfect. Get more experience. Someone else can do it better. Don't embarrass yourself. And because fear whispers instead of screams, people mistake it for wisdom. But wisdom asks different questions. What if you succeed? What if this decision changes everything? What if one conversation introduces you to someone who transforms your career? What if one book changes your thinking? What if one habit changes your future? What if one risk creates a story your grandchildren will one day tell? Think about this for a moment. Imagine two people standing in exactly the same place, same education, same neighborhood, same opportunities. One spends 10 years asking, what if I fail? The other spends 10 years asking, what can I learn? By the end of those 10 years, they are living completely different lives. Not because one was luckier, because one asked a better question. Questions shape focus, focus shapes decisions. Decisions shape destiny. I once heard about a young man who wanted to climb mountains. Everyone around him laughed. They pointed at the tallest peak and said, people like us don't belong there. For years he believed them, until one morning he realized something so simple it changed everything. The people telling him what was impossible had never climbed a mountain themselves. Think about that. How often do we allow people with no experience to define the limits of our potential? Someone who never started a business tells you entrepreneurship is impossible. Someone who never wrote a book tells you writing isn't realistic. Someone who never changed their own life tells you people never change, and somehow we believe them. Why? Because doubt spreads faster than courage. Courage demands action. Doubt requires nothing. That's why rooms full of dreamers often become rooms full of spectators. Someone stands up and says, I have an idea. Immediately another voice responds, that probably won't work. Nobody checks the facts. Nobody investigates. Nobody experiments. The dream dies before it ever gets tested. Not because reality defeated it, because opinion did. Let me tell you something. Opinions have never built anything. Action has. Think about a child learning to walk. How many times does that child fall? Dozens, 100, maybe thousands. Does anyone look at the child after the 10th fall and say, I guess walking just isn't for you? Of course not, because failure during learning is expected. Somehow adults forget that. Adults fail once, maybe twice. Suddenly, they begin writing permanent conclusions based on temporary experiences. I guess I'm not talented. I guess I can't do this. I guess this isn't my destiny. No, you just fell down. Stand back up. Every master you've ever admired has a private collection of embarrassing beginnings nobody talks about. The successful musician remembers empty rooms. The successful entrepreneur remembers unpaid bills. The successful athlete remembers losing. The successful speaker remembers shaking hands and nervous voices. The successful leader remembers uncertainty. Nobody begins looking impressive. Progress always looks awkward before it looks extraordinary. Here's what most people don't understand. Embarrassment is temporary. Regret can last a lifetime. Years from now, you won't remember every uncomfortable conversation. But you may remember the opportunity you never took, the business you never started, the apology you never gave, the dream you kept postponing, the life you kept imagining instead of living. I want you to picture yourself at 80 years old. Imagine sitting quietly by a window. The world has slowed down. Your hair has turned gray. Your hands carry the story of time. Now imagine your younger self walks into that room. The version of you sitting here today. What conversation would happen? Would your older self smile proudly and say, you were scared, but you moved anyway? Or would there be silence? Would there be tears? Would there be questions that can never be answered? What would have happened if you had just believed in yourself? That question echoes louder with every passing year. No risk, no story. Every meaningful chapter begins with uncertainty. Every meaningful friendship begins with introducing yourself to someone you don't know. Every meaningful career begins with an application that might be rejected. Every meaningful relationship begins with vulnerability. Every meaningful transformation begins with admitting, my current life is not the final version of me. Here's another truth. People think risk only exists in action. They forget risk also exists in inaction. There is risk in staying where you are. risk in ignoring your health, risk in refusing to learn, risk in remaining average, risk in settling, risk in pretending tomorrow is guaranteed. The safest path can quietly become the most dangerous one, because while you're protecting yourself from possible failure, time keeps moving. Time never pauses because you're uncertain. The calendar doesn't negotiate. Every sunrise silently asks the same question. What are you going to do with me today? And every sunset quietly records your answer. One day becomes a week becomes a month becomes a year, years become a lifetime, not through dramatic moments, but through repeated ordinary choices. That's the compound effect very few people appreciate. One decision seems small. Reading 10 pages today seems insignificant. Saving a little money seems insignificant. Making one difficult phone call seems insignificant. Practicing for 30 minutes seems insignificant. But compound those decisions over 5 years, and suddenly people call you lucky. Luck often wears the disguise of consistency. I remember meeting an elderly craftsman who spent decades carving wood by hand. His work was extraordinary. People would gather around his table, amazed at the detail. One young visitor asked him, "How long does it take to make something this beautiful?" The old craftsman smiled. He looked down at the carving, then he looked back at the young man. He said, "This piece took 3 weeks." Then he paused. "No, actually it took 40 years and 3 weeks. The young man looked confused. The craftsman laughed softly. "You only counted the days I touched this piece. I counted every day I practiced before I was good enough to create it." Think about that. People admire the final performance. They rarely see the invisible preparation. Your future is being built in the moments nobody applauds. When you wake up early and no one notices. When you keep your promise to yourself, even though nobody is watching. When you choose discipline over comfort. When you continue after disappointment. Those quiet moments are voting for the person you are becoming. And the remarkable thing is that your identity doesn't change all at once. It changes through evidence. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, your mind quietly says, "Maybe I can trust this person." Every time you quit on yourself, your mind quietly says, "Maybe promises don't mean much." Self-belief is not magic. It is often the result of collecting enough evidence that you are capable of doing difficult things. That's why keeping small promises matters. Wake up when you said you would. Finish what you started. Read when you don't feel like reading. Exercise when excuses appear. Practice when motivation disappears. Little by little, your identity begins to shift. You stop saying, "I hope I become disciplined." Instead, you begin saying, "I am someone who keeps going." That single identity change becomes the foundation for everything else. And once that foundation begins to strengthen, something fascinating starts to happen. The risks that once looked terrifying begin to look possible, not because the mountain became smaller, because you became stronger. There is a difference. Most people spend their lives praying for lighter burdens. Very few spend their lives building stronger shoulders. Let me tell you something. The world doesn't always reward the person with the greatest talent. It often rewards the person who stayed in the game longer than everyone else. Think about a river. Have you ever watched water carve through solid rock? Water is soft. Rock is hard. Lala Koch would tell you the rock should always win. But return 100 years later, and you'll discover something remarkable. The rock has changed, the water has not. Consistency defeated resistance. Not through force, through persistence. Here's what most people don't understand. Success is rarely dramatic while you're living it. It feels ordinary, it feels repetitive, it feels almost boring. The musician practices scales. The athlete repeats drills. The writer edits another page. The entrepreneur makes another phone call. The student studies another chapter. The parent chooses patience one more time. None of those moments make headlines, but together They build a life that eventually looks extraordinary. That's why so many people quit. They're addicted to excitement instead of commitment. They want fireworks every day. Life usually gives you bricks, one brick, then another, then another. And one day you turn around and realize you've built a castle. Not because you had one magical weekend, because you refuse to stop laying bricks. I want you to imagine a sculptor standing in front of a massive block of stone. Someone walks by on the first day. They see nothing but a rough piece of rock the second day. Still nothing the 10th day. Still nothing recognizable the 100th day. Suddenly, people gather around. Amazing, incredible talent. What a masterpiece. But was the masterpiece created by the final strike of the hammer? No. It was created by every strike. The last one simply revealed what thousands before it had already made possible. Your life works exactly like that. Every difficult morning, every disciplined decision, every uncomfortable conversation, every rejection, every lesson, every failure, every comeback, every sacrifice. Each one is another strike of the hammer. People will eventually see the sculpture. Only you will know how many invisible strikes it took. Here's another lesson I learned. Belief isn't something you either have or don't have. Belief is something you feed. Imagine two wolves living inside your mind. One whispers courage. The other whispers doubt. One says, you can learn. The other says, you'll never be enough. One reminds you of your progress. The other reminds you only of your mistakes. Which one grows stronger? The one you feed every single day. Think about your conversations with yourself. If another person spoke to you the way you sometimes speak to yourself, would you keep that person in your life? Probably not. Yet many people wake up every morning and become their own harshest critic. I'm too old. I'm too young. I'm too late. I'm not smart enough. I don't have enough money. I've already failed. Do you realize what you're doing? You're asking your own mind to build a future while constantly convincing it that the future isn't possible. No wonder so many dreams disappear. The dream didn't die because life was impossible. The dream slowly suffocated under years of negative conversation. Let me tell you something. Words become beliefs. Beliefs become actions. Success become habits. Habits become identity. Identity becomes destiny. That's why the conversation happening inside your own head matters more than the conversation happening around you. People may doubt you. They may misunderstand you. They may underestimate you. But if you refuse to join them, you still have a chance. The dangerous moment is not when someone else loses faith in you. The dangerous moment is when you agree with them. Because once you accept a limitation as truth, you begin living beneath your potential. I met a man years ago who repaired old watches. His shop was tiny. Dust covered the shelves. Old clocks ticked from every corner. He picked up a broken watch and smiled. It still has value. I asked him why he smiled at something that obviously wasn't working. He replied, broken isn't the same as worthless. That sentence stayed with me. How many people have confused those two ideas? Life knocked them down. A business failed. A relationship ended. An opportunity disappeared. Someone betrayed them. They made terrible mistakes. And somewhere along the way, they stopped saying, I've been through something difficult. Instead, they started saying, I must not be worth much. Do you see the difference? One describes an experience. The other becomes an identity. Never allow temporary pain to define permanent value. A cracked mirror still reflects light. A storm-damaged tree can still produce fruit. A scar is proof of healing, not proof of defeat. Your past explains you. It does not imprison you. Think about this for a moment. If failure truly defined people forever, then no inventor would ever invent twice. No athlete would compete again after losing. No child would learn to ride a bicycle. No artist would paint another canvas after criticisms. Human progress depends on our willingness to fail without surrendering our identity. No risk, no story. But there is something deeper hiding inside those words. Every risk asks a question. Who are you becoming? Not, what are you getting? Most people take action only if they can guarantee a reward. Growth asks something different. Can you become the kind of person who acts even when certainty doesn't exist? That's where transformation begins. Because eventually, you stop chasing success. You start building character. And character carries you through seasons when motivation disappears. Let's talk about motivation for a moment. People love motivation because it feels exciting. But motivation is like weather. Some mornings it's sunny. Some mornings it's raining. Some mornings there's a storm. Imagine a farmer who only planted crops when he felt inspired. His family would starve. Imagine a pilot who only flew airplanes when he woke up feeling motivated. Nobody would trust the flight. Professionals don't build their lives around feelings. They build systems. They build routines. They build standards. They decide in advance who they are. Then they let emotions catch up later. Here's what most people don't understand. Your future self is begging your present self to become more disciplined. Every decision you're avoiding today eventually arrives in tomorrow's mailbox. Guys, your health today. Tomorrow opens the letter. Ignore your finances today. Tomorrow opens the letter. Bonds your relationships today. Tomorrow opens the letter. Bonds your dreams today. Tomorrow opens the letter. Life is patient. It keeps perfect records, which is why every ordinary day matters so much. People imagine that one giant opportunity will rescue them. One lucky break, one perfect connection, one miraculous event. Sometimes those moments happen, but they're usually recognized only by people who prepared long before they arrived. Opportunity doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes it whispers. And only prepared ears hear it. I once heard about a violinist who practiced every morning before sunrise. For years, nobody listened. Neighbors complained. Friends questioned the sacrifice. His family wondered if he was wasting his life. Then one evening, a famous conductor unexpectedly attended a local performance. The violinist played. The audience stood in applause. Newspapers called him an overnight success. Overnight? The conductor laughed when he heard that phrase. He said, "You watched one performance. I saw 20 years of preparation." Never envy what required invisible sacrifice. Respect it. Learn from it. Build your own, because somewhere, while everyone else is sleeping a little longer, someone is reading another chapter. Someone is practicing another skill. Someone is making another sales call. Someone is improving their craft by 1% more. 1% doesn't seem like much today. But 1% repeated daily creates a completely different person. Imagine two people starting at exactly the same place. One improves just a little each day. The other stays comfortable. After a week, they look almost identical. After a month, still similar. After a year, the distance becomes noticeable. After 10 years, people call one extraordinary. They forget the extraordinary life was built from ordinary days that were simply used differently. Think about an airplane leaving the runway. If the pilot changes direction by just 1 degree, one tiny degree, at first, nobody notices. The passengers don't feel anything. The view outside barely changes. But after hundreds of miles, that tiny adjustment leads to a completely different destination. Your habits are those tiny degrees. The books you read, the people you spend time with, the thoughts you repeat, the promises you keep, the excuses you entertain. Each one nudges your direction ever so slightly. Which is why your future is often less about giant decisions and more about repeated small ones. Let me ask you something. Who are you becoming through what you repeatedly do? Not what you occasionally do. Not what you hope to do. What you repeatedly do, because repetition is always telling the truth. If I followed you quietly for 30 days, I probably wouldn't need to ask about your future goals. Your routines would answer for you. Your calendar would answer. Your habits would answer. Your priorities would answer. And that realization can be uncomfortable. But discomfort is not your enemy. Sometimes discomfort is simply truth knocking on the door. Most people run from discomfort. The extraordinary learn to sit with it long enough to hear what it's trying to teach them. Because every uncomfortable season carries a lesson wrapped inside it. The question is whether you'll unwrap it. There comes a moment in every meaningful journey when you realize that the person you were at the beginning could never have carried the life you are living now. Think about that for a moment. Maybe the goal was never just to reach the destination. Maybe the goal was to become the